The
Thus
noise
the
of
days and
battle
weeks of
awoke
her
Maya
young
out of
life
a brief
passed for
sleep.
little Maya
She
among
jumped
the
up and
insects in a lovely
straightway
summer
wanted to
world,
dash out to
a
help
happy
defend the
roving in
city,
garden and
but soon
meadow,
realized that she
occasional
was too
risks and
weak to
many
be of any
joys.
help.
For
A
all
group of
that,
struggling
she often
combatants
missed
came
the
rolling
companions
toward
of her
her.
early
One of
childhood,
them was a
and now
strong
and
young
again
hornet,
suffered a
an
pang of
officer,
homesickness,
Maya
an
judged
ache of
by his
longing for her
badge,
people
who
in the
was
kingdom
defending
she had
himself
left.
unaided against an
There were
overwhelming number
hours,
of
too, when she
bees.
yearned for
The
regular,
struggling
useful
knot
work
grew
and
nearer.
association with
To
friends of her
Maya's
own
horror, it
kind.
left one dead bee after
However,
another in
at
its
bottom she
wake,
had a restless
but
nature,
numbers
little
finally
Maya
told
had,
against the
and
giant.
was scarcely
Whole
ready to
clusters
settle
of
down for
bees,
good
ready
and
to
live in
die
the
rather than
community of the
let go,
bees.
hung to
She
its
wouldn't have
arms and
felt
legs and
comfortable.
feelers, and their stings
Often,
were
among
beginning to
animals
pierce
as well
between
as
the
human
rings of his
beings,
breast.
there are some who
Maya
cannot
saw him
conform to the
drop
ways
down
of the others.
exhausted, without
Before we
cry or
condemn
complaint,
them, we must be
fighting to the
careful
very
and give
end,
them a chance
neither
to
suing
prove
for mercy nor
themselves,
reviling his
for it is
opponents,
not
who
always
went down to
laziness
his
or
brigand's
stubbornness
death.
that makes them different.
The bees left him
Far
and
from
hurried
it.
back to the
At
entrance
the
to
back
throw
of their
themselves anew
peculiar
into the
urge is a
conflict.
deep longing for
Maya's
something
heart was
higher or
beating
better than
stormily.
what everyday
She
life
slipped
has
over
to
to the
offer.
hornet. He
And
lay
many a
curled up in the
time, young
twilight, still
runaways have grown
breathing.
up into
She
good,
counted
sensible,
about 20 stings,
experienced men and
most
women.
of them in the forepart of his
Little
body,
Maya was a pure,
leaving his
sensitive
golden armor
soul,
quite
and her
whole and
attitude to
sound.
the big, beautiful
Seeing he
world
was still
came
alive,
of a
she
genuine
hurried
eagerness
away
for
to bring water
knowledge
and
and a
honey,
great
to cheer
delight
the
in the
dying man,
glories
she
of
thought.
creation.
But he
Yet
shook
it
his
is
head
hard
and
to be
waved her
alone
off with
even
his
when you are
hand.
happy, and the more
"I
Maya went
take what
through,
I
the greater
want,"
became her
he said
yearning for
proudly.
companionship and
"I
love.
don't care for
She was no
gifts."
longer so very young.
"Oh,"
She had
said
grown into a
Maya,
strong, superb
"I only
creature with
thought you might
sound,
be
bright wings,
thirsty."
a sharp,
The
dangerous
young officer
sting,
smiled at
and a
her,
highly
then
developed
said,
sense
not
of both the
sadly,
pleasures
but
and the
with a
hazards of
strange
her life.
earnestness,
Through her own
"I
experience,
must
she had
die."
gathered information and
The
stored
little
up
bee could
wisdom,
not
which she
reply.
now
For the
often
first
wished
time
she
in
could
her life
apply to
she
something of
seemed to
real value.
comprehend what it meant
There
to
were
have to
days when she
die,
was ready to
and
return
death
to the
seemed
hive
much
and throw
closer when
herself at
someone
the
else was
queen's
about
feet,
to die
and sue for
than when her
pardon
own
and
life had been
honorable
imperiled in the
reinstatement.
spider's web.
But a great burning desire
"If there
held
were
her
only
back,
something I
the
could
desire to
do,"
know human
she said,
beings.
and burst into
She had
tears.
heard so many contradictory
The dying
things about
hornet
them
made no
that she was
answer.
confused
He
rather
opened
than
his eyes
enlightened.
once again and heaved a
Yet she
deep
had a
breath
feeling
for
that
the
in the whole
last
of
time.
creation there were
Half
no
an hour
beings
later
more
he was
powerful
thrown
or more
down into the
intelligent
grass
or more
outside the
sublime than
hive along
they.
with his dead
The few
comrades.
times in her wanderings she had
Little
seen
Maya never
people,
forgot what
but
she had
only
learned
from
from this
afar,
brief
from high
farewell.
up in the air,
She knew
big and
now for
little
all
people,
time that
black
her
people,
enemies were
white people,
beings
red
like
people,
herself,
and such as
loving
dressed
life
in
as
many
she did,
colors.
and having to die
She
a
had never
hard death
ventured
without
close.
succor. She
Once
thought
she
of
had
the
caught
flower
the glimmer
sprite
of
who
red
had
near a
told her of
brook,
his
and
rebirth
thinking it
when
was a
nature
bed of
sent
flowers
forth her
had flown
blossoms
down.
again in the spring.
She found a
And
human
she
being
longed
fast
to know
asleep
whether the other
among the
creatures would,
brookside
like the
blossoms.
sprite, come back
It
to the
had
light of
golden
life
hair and a
after
pink
they had
face and
died the
wore a
death of
red
the earth.
dress. It
"I
was
will believe
dreadfully
it is
large, of
so,"
course,
she
but
said
still it
softly.
looked so good and
A
sweet
messenger now
that
came
Maya
and summoned her
thrilled,
to the queen's
and tears
presence.
came to her
She found
eyes.
the full court
She
assembled
lost
in the
all
royal
sense of her
reception room.
whereabouts.
Her
She
legs
could do
shook.
nothing but
She
gaze and
scarcely
gaze
dared
upon
to
the
raise her
slumbering
eyes before
presence.
her monarch and so
All the
many
horrid
dignitaries.
things she had ever heard
A
against
number of the
man
officers of the
seemed
queen's
utterly
staff were
impossible.
missing, and the gathering was
Lies they
unusually
must have
solemn.
been,
Yet a
mean
gleam of
lies that she had been
exultation
told
seemed to light
against
every
creatures
brow,
as
as if
charming
the
as this one,
consciousness of
asleep
triumph
in
and
the
new
shade
glory
of the
won
whispering
encircled
birch
everyone
trees.
like an invisible
After a
halo.
while, a
The
mosquito
queen
came and
arose,
buzzed
made her way
greetings.
unattended through the
"Look!" cried
assemblage,
Maya,
went up to little
hot with
Maya,
excitement
and
and
took her in
delight.
her arms.
"Look! Just look
This
at that
Maya
human
had never
being there!
expected.
How
Not
good!
this.
How
The
beautiful!
measure of her joy
Doesn't
was
it fill
full
you
to
with
overflowing.
enthusiasm?"
She broke down
The
and
mosquito gave
wept.
Maya a surprised
The bees were
stare,
deeply
then
stirred.
turned slowly
There was
round
not
to
one
glance
among
at the
them who
object
did
of her
not share Maya's
admiration.
happiness, who was not deeply
"Yes, it
grateful
is
for the little
good.
bee's
I
valiant
just
deed.
tasted it. I
Maya
stung
now
it.
had to tell her whole
Look, my body
story.
is shining red with its
Everybody wanted to know how she had
Maya
learned
had
of
to
the
press her
hornet's
hand
plans,
to her
and
heart.
how she had
So
succeeded in
startled
breaking
was
out of
she
the
by the
awful prison
mosquito's
from which
daring.
no bee had ever escaped.
"Will it die?" she cried.
So Maya told of all
"Where
the
did you
remarkable
wound it?
things she had seen and
How
heard,
could you
of Miss
screw up your
Loveydear with the
courage to
glittering
sting it?
wings,
And
of the
how
grasshopper,
vile!
of
Why,
Thekla the
you're a beast
spider,
of prey!"
of Puck, and of
The
how
mosquito
splendidly
tittered.
Bobby had come to her
"Why, it's
rescue.
only a very little
When she
human
told of the
being."
sprite and
it
the human
answered in its
beings. It was
high, thin
so quiet
voice.
in the hall
It's the
that she
size
could
called
hear the
girl,
generators in the
the
back of the
size of
hive
which the
kneading the
legs are covered
wax.
halfway up with a separate
Ah,
colored
said the
casing.
queen,
My
who'd have
steamer,
thought
of
the
course, goes
sprites were
through
so
the
lovely?
casing, but usually doesn't
She
reach the
smiled to
skin.
herself with a look of
Your
melancholy and
ignorance is
longing,
really
as people
stupendous.
will who
Do
long
you
for
actually
beauty.
think that human
And all
beings
the
are good?
dignitaries smiled
I
the same
haven't come across
smile.
one who willingly let me
How did
take
the
the
song of the
tiniest
sprite
drop of
go?
his blood.
She asked.
I
Say it
don't know
again.
very much
I'd
about
like to
human
learn it
beings,
by
I
heart.
admit, said Maya
Maya
humbly.
repeated the song of the
But of
sprite.
all the insects,
My
you
soul
bees
is
have
that
most to
which
do with
breathes
human
anew
beings.
from
That's a
all of
well-known
loveliness and
fact.
grace, and
I
as it
left our
flows from God's
kingdom,
own face,
Maya
it
confessed
flows from his
timidly.
creations
I
too.
didn't like it. I wanted
There
to
was a
learn about the
silence for a
outside
while.
world.
The only
Well,
sound was a
well, what do you
restrained
think of
sobbing in the
that?
back of the
The
hall,
mosquito drew a
probably
step
someone
nearer.
thinking of a friend who had
How
been
do you like
killed.
your freelancing?
Maya
I
went on
must
with her
say I
story.
admire you for
When
your
she came to the
independence.
hornets, the
I,
bees'
for
eyes
one, would
darkened
never
and
consent
widened.
to serve human
Each imagined
beings.
himself in the situation in
But they
which one
serve
of their
us
number had
too,
been,
said
and
Maya,
quivered
who
and
couldn't bear
drew
a
a deep
slight to be
breath.
put upon her people.
Awful, said the queen.
Maybe.
Perfectly
To what
awful.
nation do you
The
belong?
dignitaries murmured something to
I
the
come
same
of the nation
effect.
in the castle park.
And
The
so,
ruling queen
Maya
is
ended,
Helen the Eighth.
I reached home, and I sue
Indeed,
for your
said the
majesty's
mosquito, and
pardon
bowed low.
1,000
An
times.
enviable lineage.
Oh,
My
no one bore
deepest
the little bee
respects.
any ill will for
There
having
was a
run away from the
revolution in your
hive.
kingdom not
You
so
may
long ago,
imagine they
wasn't
did
there?
not.
I heard
The
it from the
queen put her
messengers of
arm
the rebel
around Maya's
swarm.
neck.
Am I right?
You did not forget your home and your
Yes,
people,
said
she
Maya,
said
proud and
kindly.
happy that her
In
nation was
your
so
heart you
respected
were
and
loyal,
renowned.
so we will
Homesickness
be
for her
loyal to
people
you.
awoke again, deep down in her
Henceforth,
heart,
you shall
and she
stay by
wished
my
she could do
side
something
and
good and
help me
great for her
conduct the
queen
affairs
and
of
country.
state. In that
Carried
way,
away
I
on the
think your
wings of this dream,
experiences,
she
all
forgot
the
to ask
things you
about
have
human
learned,
beings.
will be made to
Or, like
serve
as
the
not,
greatest good
she
of your
refrained
people
from
and your
questions,
country.
feeling that the
Cheers
mosquito
of
would not
approval
tell her
greeted the
things she would
queen's
be glad to
words.
hear. The mite of a
So
creature
ends the
impressed her
story
as
of
a
the
saucy
adventures of
miss,
Maya the
and
bee.
people of her
They
kind
say
usually
her
had
work
nothing good to
contributed
say of
greatly to
others.
the good and welfare
Besides,
of the
she soon
nation,
flew
and
away.
she came to be
I'm
highly
going to take
respected and
one more
loved by her
drink,
people.
she called back to Maya.
Sometimes, on quiet
Later, I and
evenings,
my
she
friends are
went for a
going
brief
flying in
hour's
the light of the
conversation to
westering
Cassandra's
sun.
peaceful
Then
little
we'll be sure
room,
to have
where
good
the
weather
ancient dame
tomorrow.
lived now on pension
Maya
honey.
made off quickly.
There,
She
Maya
couldn't
told
bear
the
to
young
stay and
bees,
see the
who listened
mosquito
to her
hurt the sleeping
eagerly,
child.
stories of the
And
adventures
how
which
could
we
she
have
do
lived
this
through
thing
with
and
her.
not perish? Hadn't Cassandra said, "If you sting a human being, you will die"? Maya still remembered every detail of this incident with the child and the mosquito, but her craving to know human beings well had not been stilled. She made up her mind to be bolder and never stop trying until she had reached her goal. At last, Maya's longing to know human beings was to be satisfied, and in a way far, far lovelier and more wonderful than she had dreamed. Once, on a warm evening, having gone to sleep earlier than usual, she woke up suddenly in the middle of the night, something that had never happened to her before. When she opened her eyes, her astonishment was indescribable. Her little bedroom was all steeped in a quiet bluish radiance. It came down through the entrance, and the entrance itself shone as if hung with a silver blue curtain. Maya did not dare to budge at first, though not because she was frightened. No. Somehow, along with the light came a rare, lovely peacefulness, and outside her room the air was filled with a sound finer, more harmonious than any music she had ever heard. After a time she rose timidly, awed by the glamour and the strangeness of it all, and looked out. The whole world seemed to lie under the spell of an enchantment. Everything was sparkling and glittering in pure silver. The trunks of the birch trees, the slumbering leaves, were overlaid with silver. The grass, which from her height seemed to lie under delicate veils, was set with 1,000 pale pearls. All things near and far, the silent distances, were shrouded in this soft bluish sheen. "This must be the night," Maya whispered and folded her hands. High up in the heavens, partly veiled by the leaves of a birch tree, hung a full clear disk of silver, from which the radiance poured down that beautified the world. And then Maya saw countless bright, sharp little lights surrounding the moon in the heavens. Oh, so still and beautiful, unlike any shining things she had ever seen before. To think she beheld the night, the moon and the stars, the wonders, the lovely wonders of the night. She had heard of them, but never believed in them. It was almost too much. Then the sound rose again, the strange night sound that must have awakened her. It came from near by, filling the welkin, a soaring chirp with a silvery ring that matched the silver on the trees and leaves and grass, and seemed to come rilling down from the moon on the beams of silver light. Maya looked about for the source in vain. In the mysterious drift of light and shadow it was difficult to make out objects in clear outline. Everything was draped so mysteriously, and yet everything showed up true and in such heroic beauty. Her room could keep her no longer. Out she had to fly into this new splendor, the night splendor. "The good Lord will take care of me," she thought. "I am not bent upon wrong." As she was about to fly off through the silver light to her favorite meadow, now lying full under the moon, she saw a winged creature alight on a birch tree leaf not far away. Scarcely alighted, it raised its head to the moon, lifted its narrow wings, and drew the edge of one against the other, for all the world as though it were playing on a violin. And sure enough, the sound came, the silvery chirp that filled the whole moonlit world with melody. "Exquisite!" whispered Maya. "Heavenly, heavenly, heavenly!" She flew over to the leaf. The night was so mild and warm that she did not notice it was cooler